On the edge of a dusty road sat a posh imported car. It was stained with splashes of mud all over, and its windshield was a mess. Beside the car, 3 young lads stood, each under 20. These guys were known for their bold antics, extravagant spending, and always dressing in top-notch fashion. All 3 were buddies from the same university. Paul was the future doctor among them. They had grown up believing that they could do anything they wanted. Their days were filled with lavish dinners, clubbing, and endless night parties. Such was the whirlwind of their life that they often forgot about their morning lectures after a night out. On this particular day, rather than heading home after a party, they had decided to venture further out of the city. Word was that a rich farmer's son was throwing a massive bash. Paul, Henry, and Jeff couldn't resist such an invitation. The party was a hit. Walking back to their shiny car parked in the muddy patch, Henry's eyes sparkled with a naughty idea. "Hey, how about we take this beauty on a wild ride? I heard of a road that cuts through the forest, pure and unexplored." Paul, always the sensible one, shot back. "Henry, this car isn't built for off-roading. You sure about this?" Jeff chuckled, hugging them both. "Come on, how bad could it be?" And just like that, they embarked on a rugged journey. Dust clouds trailed them as the car grumbled in protest, navigating around fallen branches, leaping over waterlogged patches, and evading jagged stones. The trio's wild adventure began. "Henry, this car is not built for rough roads," Paul exclaimed, gripping his seat tightly. "Lighten up, Paul," Henry replied, his eyes alight with adrenaline. In what seemed like an eternity, but was merely minutes, they found themselves back on smooth pavement, taking deep breaths of relief. However, their brief moment of triumph was shattered by an unmistakable sound, the slow hiss of air escaping. Jeff peered into the rearview mirror. "Did we just—" Paul confirmed with a heavy nod. "Both back tires are gone." Henry slumped in his seat. "Okay, maybe that wasn't the smartest move." Jeff smirked. "You think?" Amidst the enveloping darkness, Paul, trying to keep his composure, retrieved his phone. "I'll call for a tow," he said, sounding wary. "But they might take some time to get here." "Hold on, I'm short on cash," Henry said, looking worried. "Should we call my dad?" "No way, we should have been in our lecture right now," Jeff reminded. Henry groaned. "Great. If he finds out about this, he'll definitely freeze my card." Jeff thought for a moment. "First, let's head back to the city, clean up and change. Afterward, one of us can return with the tow truck." Henry and Paul exchanged glances, realizing Jeff's plan made sense. The unmistakable aroma of alcohol hung around them, evidence of their wild night out. Dawn was breaking, and they were just sobering up from their escapades. Hitchhiking was new territory for the trio. The thought of sticking their thumbs out, hoping for a stranger's kindness, was alien and to some extent humbling. However, as the saying goes, there is always a first time, so even pampered young men could find themselves in unfamiliar situations, leveling with the common man's predicaments. On this stretch of the highway, cars were few and far between, decreasing their chances of hitching a ride. It felt like the dwindling snow of March, slowly disappearing under the sun's warmth. "Seriously? We might be stuck here till noon," Jeff lamented. Paul, trying to be the voice of reason, replied, "Relax, Jeff. We're not in the city anymore. Public transports aren't on a tight schedule here. We'll get something." Henry, often the impatient one, was about to step into the comforting shade of the nearby trees when he saw a silhouette of a bus appearing from a distant curb. "Guys, check that out. A bus is coming our way." Instantly, both Jeff and Paul stood alert, their previous frustration replaced by a surge of hope. Stranded in the middle of nowhere, without their wallets or their ride, the young men felt a sense of vulnerability they weren't accustomed to, and they were eager to shake it off. The bus drew nearer, and the trio could make out the driver more clearly. She was a woman, likely in her 30s, adorned with a distinct headscarf that draped gracefully across her forehead. "Didn't expect a woman behind the wheel, huh?" Paul remarked, attempting to inject some humor as he stepped onto the bus. His comment elicited chuckles from his friends, their collective laughter loud enough to draw curious and disapproving glances from some of the passengers. The unmistakable scent of alcohol wafted from them, reminiscent of a worn-out tavern at the end of a long night. With their usual casualness, the guys fumbled for their seats. Paying their fare, they carelessly threw their money towards the driver, as though they were casually tipping a street musician. "You can keep the change. Might help with some makeup," Jeff remarked cheekily. "She probably can't even afford the good stuff," Henry quipped, causing another round of party laughter among the trio. The driver's cheeks reddened, clearly taken aback by their comments, but she held her tongue, focusing on the road. With the absence of a conductor that day, she had the added responsibility of managing fares and passengers. The rowdy banter of the three inebriated young men was clearly grating on her patience. Finally, she half-turned to address them. "Gentlemen, could you please lower your voices? This isn't a private ride." The trio was taken aback by the driver's remark. In their world, they were usually met with nods of agreement and words of affirmation. At restaurants, waitstaff would dote on them, eager to please. Shops would roll out the proverbial red carpet, and during these affluent patrons felt catered to every moment. This kind of deference was almost an everyday backdrop to their lives. Yet today, they'd met their match in the bus driver, Alice. She wasn't going to be swayed by the status or antics. Her objective was clear: drive safely and follow the rules. But the boys weren't about to let this pass without making a scene. "You might want to keep your eyes on the road," Jeff began, raising his voice so the entire bus could catch every word. "Whoever thought it was a good idea to let a monkey steer the bus? Aren't there men around who can do the job?" Paul and Henry's laughter echoed, the sharp and cackling kind, akin to that of hyenas. Alice's hands gripped the steering wheel even tighter, but she kept her cool. She had encountered such comments before, but hearing them from these entitled young men was particularly stinging. Silently adjusting her headscarf, she navigated the turn with precision. In just about 40 minutes, she'd be free of the bothersome trio, who by sheer chance had found themselves on her route that day. Alice was a recent addition to this route. Before this, she navigated a compact shuttle amidst the city's tight traffic-laden lanes. But her heart yearned for the expansive freedom of the highway. It had always been her dream to pilot a bus on longer, intercity routes. From the tender age of 18, Alice had been behind the wheel, mastering the art of driving a vast range of vehicles, from nimble motorcycles to hulking trucks. Her passion for commanding large vehicles wasn't just a personal choice, it was a legacy. It sprang from countless memories she made with her father. During her formative years, Alice's father, a seasoned driver himself, would often take her along on his varied journeys. These weren't just casual trips, but rather opportunities for her to witness the world of giant machines. She sat beside him in the roaring cabins of dump trucks, felt the rumble of semi-trucks under her, and even experienced the chorus of conversations on buses. Each trip with her dad was an adventure, a lesson. She would watch, fascinated as he effortlessly maneuvered these massive vehicles through narrow lanes and busy highways. Over time, Alice picked up not just the skills, but also her father's love for driving. And as she grew, it wasn't just about the vehicles, but the memories, lessons, and bonds she shared with her father that fueled her passion. Whenever Zoe saw Alice's enthusiasm for vehicles, she'd shake her head in disbelief. "Really, Alice? You're a mom. You've got a household to manage, a son starting school, and a sick mother to look after. Why this obsession with trucks and buses? I mean, sure, drive a car, but a bus? Really?" Alice took a deep breath before responding. "Zoe, you've known me forever. You know how close I was to my dad and how much time we spent on the road. Those trucks and buses aren't just vehicles to me. They're my childhood memories. I don't expect you to understand, but it's a part of who I am." For Alice, driving wasn't just about being behind the wheel. It was her escape, a way to find some peace amidst the chaos of her life. The familiar hum of the engine and the open road helped her find clarity, especially after the tumultuous year she had. A year ago, her husband Zach had walked out on her and their young son Sean. The whispered rumors in town suggested that he had fallen for a wealthy, younger woman who had caught his fancy. Many in their circle hadn't been surprised, often whispering that Zach was never quite the marrying kind. But to Alice, he had once been her everything. Alice would never forget her first day working at the bus depot. As soon as she walked through the door, the place buzzed with whispers and chuckles. Some of the drivers looked amused, while others looked downright disapproving. "Another one," the driver exclaimed, trying to make sure everyone heard him. A few others laughed. Another driver joined in. "What's next? A woman fixing engines?" Alice took a deep breath, fighting the urge to show any sign of weakness. "I'm here to do my job, just like you," she said, her voice strong but her heart pounding. The days and weeks that followed weren't easy. More than once, Alice questioned her choices, sitting alone in her kitchen, her face buried in her hands, but she refused to give up. She often stayed late to practice, driving her empty bus up and down the depot to master every maneuver. Alice's reputation at the bus depot underwent a significant change after a dramatic incident that unfolded on one of her regular routes. She was driving her usual path when chaos broke out ahead. A young man around Alice's age had been forced into a gut-wrenching decision. An inebriated driver swerved into his lane, and with mere seconds to react, he chose to veer his car into a tree instead of risking a direct collision. The crash was so violent that the front of the car crumpled like a soda can, trapping him inside. Worse still, sparks from the crash ignited a fire due to a ruptured fuel line, turning the vehicle into a ticking time bomb. Alice's instincts took over. She immediately pulled the bus to the side of the road, grabbed the fire extinguisher from its holder, and sprinted to the blazing vehicle. She worked with the efficiency and confidence of someone who had undergone emergency training, though she hadn't. With the clock ticking down, she battled the flames and wrestled with the mangled car door, trying to free the injured driver. Her tenacity paid off. With an adrenaline-fueled surge of strength, she managed to pull the man out of the wreckage. Barely seconds after, with him in her arms and a safe distance away, the vehicle burst into a ferocious inferno. As the ambulance's sirens wailed in the distance, signaling incoming help, passengers from the bus crowded around, praising her heroism. Back at the bus depot, word of Alice's bravery spread like wildfire. The same colleagues who had once mocked her now looked at her with newfound respect. In their eyes, she wasn't just a female bus driver, she was a lifesaver. This pivotal moment altered the dynamics at the depot, serving as a reminder that courage and competence weren't dictated by gender. Alice, through her fearless actions, had showcased that. While battling the ferocious flames that day, Alice wasn't aware of the injuries she was incurring. It was only later, when the adrenaline had subsided, that she truly grasped the damage. Burns marred her hands and face, leaving painful reminders of that terrifying day. While she could hide the marks on her arms with clothing, a significant scar on her forehead became an unintentional point of focus. Several friends offered advice on how she might hide the prominent mark. Some recommended growing out her hair to form a curtain-like fringe that would obscure it. But Alice, always practical and true to herself, decided on another solution. She took to wearing a headscarf. Not only did it mask the scar effectively, but it also kept her vision clear and unimpeded by hair. Over time, a headscarf evolved from a functional choice to an emblem of Alice's bravery and tenacity. However, one thing sat heavily on her heart. The man she had risked her life for never made an effort to reach out and express gratitude. Alice didn't expect grand gestures or financial rewards. A simple bouquet of her beloved white roses would have warmed her heart. Even a handful of wild daisies, which she often spotted and picked during her drives, would have held great significance for her. As it was, she continued her routes with her usual dedication, often placing fresh wildflowers on her dashboard, driving past the very spot where she had once confronted danger head-on. Paul, Jeff, and Henry had grown bolder over time, acting as if they were untouchable. Their brazen behavior wasn't just limited to Alice. They also tormented other passengers. Alice had reached her breaking point. "I've warned you before. Either calm down or find another ride," Alice said firmly. "Just keep driving and mind your business," Henry sneered. "And what's that thing on your head? Is that some sort of driver's uniform?" Paul said with a smirk, pointing at her headscarf. Alice's vision blurred as tears filled her eyes. The bus was filled with vulnerable passengers, including the elderly and children, making her feel even more isolated. Memories of past hardships surged forward, amplifying her current feelings of frustration. The abandonment by her ex-husband, the cruel comments from co-workers, and the condescension from certain passengers all combined into a storm of emotions. With a fiery determination, Alice slammed the brakes and brought the bus to a stop. Whipping off her headscarf, she pointed at the door, her voice resolute. "Out. Now. Walk the rest of the way or call your parents. I don't care, but you're not riding with me." Paul and his friends hesitated for a moment, but the sight of Alice wielding a fire extinguisher, not to attack, but to emphasize her point, made them think twice. They scurried off, realizing they had finally met their match. Stranded by the roadside, the trio's cocky attitudes evaporated, replaced by a creeping sense of embarrassment. They began their trek toward town, half-heartedly trying to hitch a ride. But as car after car sped by, it became clear that their appearance and reputation made them unwelcome passengers. Then, in what initially seemed like a fortunate turn of events, a familiar car halted a short distance ahead. The car's shiny appearance glinted in the afternoon sun, and as it reversed, Paul recognized the vehicle's signature features. It was his brother Patrick's prized possession. Jeff chuckled. "Looks like our ride's here. Thanks heaven for family." Henry nodded, eagerly anticipating the plush comfort of Patrick's leather seats, especially after their long walk. But as Patrick emerged from his car, any hope of a friendly reception vanished. His posture was rigid, his face stern and unreadable, like a statue crafted from pure marble. Without uttering a greeting, his piercing gaze scanned the group, resting longer on Paul, his younger brother. "Your car break down or something?" Patrick finally inquired. "We had a flat," Paul mumbled. "You know there's a jack in the trunk, right?" Paul hesitated, then admitted. "Both tires went out." Patrick sighed deeply, rubbing his temples. "Paul, how many times do I have to bail you out? It's time you start taking responsibility. I can't keep rescuing you." Patrick always found it hard to relate to his younger brother's recklessness. Paul had privileges many could only dream of: a top-tier education, a flashy car, and the freedom to pursue his passions without any financial worries. But what troubled Patrick wasn't envy or disdain for Paul's carefree life. It was genuine concern. He often blamed Paul's friends for his wayward behavior. Patrick believed that if Paul surrounded himself with more focused and ambitious individuals, he'd be influenced in a positive way. He had seen firsthand how the company one keeps can shape one's character and decisions. From a young age, Patrick was enamored by the world of automobiles. Watching their father, Bill, transform from a humble car salesman to the owner of a sprawling chain of car dealerships had instilled in him a sense of purpose and responsibility. Bill still had his hand in many aspects of the business, but the day-to-day management had shifted to Patrick. As the CEO, he juggled numerous responsibilities, and every minute of his day counted. The last thing he wanted was to spend his precious time chasing after his wayward sibling. After dropping off Jeff and Henry, the drive home was filled with an awkward silence, the weight of the unspoken words hanging heavily in the air. As the car glided smoothly down the road, Patrick finally broke the silence. "Look, Paul," he began, choosing his words carefully. "I get it. You want to enjoy life, experience adventures, and make memories? And I genuinely want that for you. But reckless behavior isn't the way, especially after last night. I've always told you how much I despise drunk driving. It's not just about your safety, it's about everyone else on the road too. I just want you to understand the risks and think before you act. That's all." Patrick's voice, while stern, also had an underlying tone of deep concern. He hoped his message would resonate with his younger brother, steering him toward a brighter path. Patrick's deep-seated aversion to drunk drivers wasn't unfounded. Just a year prior, he had been the victim of a harrowing car accident caused by an intoxicated driver. The impact was so severe that he was plunged into a coma, with doctors unsure if he'd ever wake up. For 3 agonizing months, his family watched over him, hoping and praying for his recovery. Though he was eventually able to pull through, the scars, both physical and emotional, remained. Memories of that fateful night still haunted him, giving him nightmares. It was a chapter of his life he wished to close, but the trauma often resurfaced, especially when he saw others take the same reckless path. Paul was acutely aware of his painful history, even if Patrick didn't explicitly spell it out. The mere mention of drunk driving was enough for Paul to connect the dots, realizing the depth of concern behind Patrick's words. Every time Patrick spoke on the topic, it was a subtle reminder of the agonizing ordeal he had endured and the value of life itself. That evening, after parking her bus at the depot, Alice began her usual end-of-day inspection. She often found forgotten items on her bus, usually toys or umbrellas. As she moved through the bus, scanning for any left-behind belongings, a black object caught her eye. Nestled between the seat and the paneling was a cell phone. The memories of the three rowdy boys immediately flooded her mind, recalling where they had been sitting. With mixed feelings, she picked up the phone, stowing it away in her pocket. When she got home, the aroma of the evening's meal filled the air, a welcome distraction. It was a simple dinner, but one filled with love for her son Sean and her mother Kate. As they sat around the table, the trio shared stories from their day, with Sean animatedly recounting his adventures at school. After dinner, as Alice and Sean were playing a board game, the forgotten phone buzzed to life. Tentatively, Alice answered, her voice slightly guarded. The voice on the other end was hesitant. "Hello, miss. I believe I left my phone on your bus. Can I come by and pick it up?" Alice, recalling the earlier incident, questioned, "Were you the one who commented on my headscarf?" Paul cringed, regret evident in his voice. He had hoped to retrieve his phone without delving into the previous day's unpleasantness. "Miss, I sincerely apologize. We were out of line, especially after having too much to drink. What we said was wrong. Could I possibly get my phone back?" Hearing the sincerity in his voice, Alice softened a bit. "You can come by tomorrow, either before 7 a.m. or after 8 p.m. The next day, still carrying the weight of his actions, Paul enlisted his brother Patrick's help. He felt he needed the moral support, although he conveniently left out the details of the incident. They soon found themselves standing before Alice's doorstep, Paul's anxiety growing with every passing second. "Could you go get the phone for me? I'd rather stay in the car," Paul nervously requested of his older brother. Sensing his hesitation, Patrick probed, "Why don't you want to go yourself?" After a pause, Paul admitted, "We had a bit of a run-in with her on the bus yesterday. I'd rather not face her again." Sighing and shaking his head, Patrick decided to go himself. He walked up to the front door of the house and knocked. After waiting for a moment, Alice answered, her eyes landing on Patrick as she held Paul's cell phone in her hand. "Hello, I'm Patrick, Paul's brother. I've come to pick up his phone," he explained. Alice was momentarily taken aback, recognizing Patrick as the young man she had rescued from the fiery car wreck. She stayed silent, handing the phone over to him. Confused by her silence, Patrick thanked her. "Thank you," he said, starting to turn away. But before he could step off the porch, Alice spoke up, her voice firm. "Tell your brother he needs to learn some manners. Making fun of how someone looks isn't right." Patrick nodded, his face serious. "I'm sorry for what my brother did. He's got a lot of growing up to do. I'll make sure to talk to him." Stopping himself before stepping off the porch, Patrick took a moment to observe the headscarf that Alice wore. It was not of mere curiosity, but a feeling of déjà vu. As Alice started to close the door, Patrick hesitated before asking, "I hope it's not too forward of me to ask, but what's the story behind the headscarf?" Alice hesitated for a moment, her eyes shining with held-back tears. She looked at Patrick, taking a deep breath. "I'm just glad to see you out of the hospital," she finally whispered. The pieces of the puzzle suddenly clicked for Patrick. Recognition dawned on his face. Alice was the woman who had rescued him from the burning wreckage of his car. He felt a rush of emotions, from gratitude to shame for not recognizing her sooner. I didn't realize," Patrick stammered. "I'm so sorry. After the accident, I had memory issues. I've been trying to find the person who saved me, but I didn't have any leads." Alice gave a small understanding nod. "It's all right. I didn't do it for the recognition. I just did what felt right." Patrick took a deep breath, struggling to find the words. "Thank you," he finally whispered, "for everything. You're truly remarkable." As Patrick made his way back to the car, the weight of the revelation still pressed on him. The woman who had once selflessly risked her life to save him was now someone his younger brother had mindlessly mocked. The contrast was stark, and it gnawed at his conscience. If Patrick hadn't inquired about the headscarf, Alice might never have hinted that she was the one who had rescued him. He replayed their conversation in his head, marveling at Alice's humility. In an age where heroics often seek validation and acknowledgement, her genuine modesty stood out. As he approached the car, he glanced back at Alice's house, noting the simple exterior and the neatly kept garden. The woman who lived there was a hero in the truest sense, yet she lived a modest, everyday life. Her home, like her, didn't scream for attention, but stood strong, humble, and full of stories. He felt a mixture of guilt for not recognizing his savior sooner and anger towards his brother for disrespecting her. Paul, noticing his brother's extended absence, grew impatient. "What took so long?" he inquired as Patrick climbed into the driver's seat. Patrick turned to Paul, his eyes filled with a mix of disbelief and disappointment. "That woman, Alice? She's the one who saved me from the car crash," he began, trying to maintain his composure. "The headscarf you and your friends ridiculed conceals the scar she sustained while rescuing me." The weight of Patrick's words pressed heavily on Paul. Memories flooded back of the day he had received news of the accident. While the two brothers had their fair share of quarrels and disputes growing up, their bond was undeniable. The realization that he had belittled and mocked a woman who had risked her life to save his brother filled Paul with shame and regret. The days and weeks passed, and everyone started to find their rhythm again. Paul, after facing the harsh reality of his actions and receiving a stern talking to from his parents, realized he had been drifting aimlessly. He refocused on his medical studies, understanding the weight and responsibility that came with his chosen career path. After all, becoming a doctor wasn't just about prestige, it was about making a difference and saving lives. But beyond his academic pursuits, Paul harbored another aspiration. This newfound goal wasn't for personal gain or recognition. Instead, it stemmed from a deep-seated desire to give back and make amends for past mistakes. Paul had talked to one of his teachers, who was also a doctor who did surgeries. A couple of weeks later, Paul found himself outside Alice's house again, but this time it was early in the morning. He had parked his car and waited. When he saw her stepping out of her house, he got out of his car, holding a big bunch of flowers in his hands. He felt his heart pound as he approached her. The morning sun was shining, making the dew on the grass sparkle. Everything felt surreal. This was his chance to make a small right in a sea of wrongs. "Hey, Alice. Good to see you again," Paul said, a nervous but sincere smile on his face. Alice turned, and her eyes widened in surprise at the sight of him holding a colorful bouquet of flowers. Hi. What's going on?" Alice asked, clearly puzzled. "My name's Paul, by the way. These flowers are for you," he said, extending the bouquet toward her. "And, would you be willing to come with me to meet my teacher today?" Alice looked even more confused. "I have to go to work. What's this all about?" Paul grinned, a hint of relief in his eyes. "Don't worry, I already talked to your boss. You've got the day off." "Really? Why are you doing all this?" Paul's face turned serious. "I'm really sorry for how I acted the other day. I was drunk and it was stupid. I found out you were the one who saved my brother Patrick. I want to do something for you." They drove in silence to a private medical clinic. Before going inside, Paul looked at Alice earnestly. "Look, Alice, you don't have to worry about anything, okay? We're here to see a doctor about your scars. And don't worry about the cost. It's all taken care of." Alice looked at him, her eyes welling up with tears. She couldn't believe this was the same Paul who had mocked her. It was a shocking but heartwarming turn of events. Paul hugged her gently and said, "Everything's gonna be okay, Alice. Patrick searched for you, you know?" Paul continued, "I get that you're the kind of person who doesn't expect thanks for doing something good, but I want to make it right, if you'll let me." Alice was touched. She felt a surge of emotion and finally said, "Thank you, Paul. I never expected this. But thank you." For Paul, this felt like a moment of redemption. He still had a lot to learn, but helping Alice was a step in the right direction. He was finally starting to understand the impact of his actions on others and was determined to keep becoming a better person. Dr. Stanley was one of the top plastic surgeons at the clinic. With the years of experience under his belt, he specialized in restoring and reconstructing appearances. After an extensive evaluation, including tests and consultations, Alice was scheduled for surgery. A week later, Alice underwent the procedure. Everything went smoothly, and Dr. Stanley was pleased with the results. She spent a few days in the clinic for post-operative care before being discharged with detailed instructions. Dr. Stanley stressed the importance of rest, advising her to stay home and recuperate for the next 2 weeks. During this time, Paul became an unexpected beacon of support. He frequently dropped by, bringing fresh groceries, preparing meals, and even helping out with chores. He spent time with their young son Sean, playing games and telling stories, and offered assistance to her elderly mother, ensuring her medications were in order and she had everything she needed. Seeing the daily challenges and joys of this humble family, Paul was humbled. The once reckless young man found himself gaining a new perspective on life. He realized how blessed he was, not just materially, but with the privilege of education and opportunities. Yet in his previous mindset, he'd taken all these for granted. Spending time with Alice and her family, seeing their resilience, their bond, and their simple joys instilled in Paul a newfound appreciation for life's blessings. His heart felt fuller, his purpose clearer. The gratitude and love reflected in Alice's eyes every time he visited were enough to confirm that he was on the right path, making amends and finding true happiness in giving back. Bill and his wife Jackie began to notice a distinct change in Paul. Gone were the days when he would stumble home in the early hours after a night of reckless partying. Now he was more likely to be found with books in hand, engrossed in his studies, or waking at dawn to seize the day. This transformation was unmistakable. One evening, as the family sat in the living room, Paul rushed to his room, retrieving something, and promptly left. They exchanged glances, each silently acknowledging the evident shift in his behavior. There was no need for words. With a chuckle and a raised eyebrow, Bill commented, "Looks like our boy is finally growing up." Jackie nodded, a proud smile forming on her lips. "It's about time," she replied, their emotions a blend of relief and pride for the young man Paul was becoming. Alice stood in front of her mirror, tears streaming down her face. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she could look at herself without being reminded of the scars. She touched her reflection, overwhelmed by emotion. Just then, Paul's car pulled up in front of the house. He got out, arms loaded with bags of groceries and a large box that had a picture of a toy bus on its side. When he walked into the house, Kate, Alice's mother, couldn't help but chuckle. "Oh, Paul, you really should stop bringing so many gifts. You're going to spoil Sean rotten." Paul grinned as he put down the bags in the big box in the living room. "This one is special, though. It's a toy bus, just like the one his mom drives. I thought it would make him happy." Alice came out to see what all the fuss was about. When she saw the toy bus, her eyes lit up, echoing the newfound lightness in her own life. "You're incredible, Paul." "Thank you." "No need to thank me," Paul replied. "You've already done so much for us. This is the least I could do." Paul's family was used to their Friday evening dinners together, but this Friday was different. Everyone was seated and ready except for Paul. When he finally walked through the door, Jackie couldn't resist asking him about his frequent, mysterious absences lately. Smiling, Paul glanced at his brother Patrick and then turned to his mom. "Mom, do you remember how much I used to bug you for a sister when I was little?" His mother chuckled. "Oh, you were relentless, honey. Patrick here wasn't too thrilled about your demands, since he was already your brother." The room filled with laughter, but it was interrupted when Paul's phone buzzed with a new message. Paul stood up, his expression turning serious. "Well, I think I found someone I'd like to call my sister, Mom." Curious eyes followed him as he walked to the front door and opened it. To everyone's surprise, standing there was Alice, looking absolutely stunning in a simple, elegant dress. For weeks, Paul had been inviting Alice to come for dinner, but she had always declined. This time, though, she'd finally said yes. Paul turned to face Patrick, his eyes shiny with unshed tears. "I love you, brother," he whispered. Patrick struggled to keep his own emotions in check. He was usually reserved, not one to wear his heart on his sleeve, but seeing Paul's genuine gratitude and affection towards Alice, the woman who had saved his life, touched him deeply. It was a testament to the depth of their brotherly bond. And as Patrick's eyes met Alice's, a different emotion stirred within him. He saw a beautiful, strong woman who had been through so much. The scars she once hid with her headscarf were now gone. but it was her inner strength and resilience that truly captivated him. He felt a connection, a pull, something he hadn't experienced in a very long time. At that moment, amid the warm glow of family and love, new beginnings were taking root. Patrick could feel it in his bones. This was the start of something significant. Alice smiled, realizing that the kindness she had once given had come back to her in the most unexpected